Today we will be discussing another news coming up on the Air India Express Flight 1344 crash. We have been following this case from day one and bringing you all the latest updates that we find, and today is no different. Do they blame them for the crash or not? Let's analyze that. We will be analyzing the preliminary report of the crash investigation which has come out. So what does this report say about the pilots? Because in this way you won't miss any of our future updates. Also, consider supporting us because it will help the channel grow. With that being said, let's begin. On board were 174 passengers and 8 crew members. The plane took off from Dubai at 12:45 a.m. local time and was expected to arrive in Cochin at 6:15 a.m. But fate had something else planned for the passengers and crew of the II-1344. What followed was a horrifying crash. The Airbus A320 overran the end of the runway and fell into a gorge 35 feet below. It says that the pilots were to be blamed for the accident. The question is, what were those decisions? Here's what the report says. First of all, the pilots failed to take the aircraft to the missed approach point, which is the farthest distance that you can be from the runway and still attempt a safe landing. For example, the plane SGPWS, or the Ground Proximity Warning System, had warned the pilots that they were too low, and yet they did not take any corrective action. The investigators have also looked into the data from the flight data recorder, and they found that the pilots did not follow the correct procedure for a rejected landing. They failed to pull the plane out of the dive, and this caused the plane to lose altitude very rapidly. In fact, the GPWs had issued 3 warnings in quick succession. The first one was at 3,900 feet. There was no winds here or turbulence reported, so the weather could not have played a role in the crash. In simpler words, the pilots attempted to land the plane despite knowing that they did not have enough altitude. They ignored the warnings and the computer's instructions, and they ended up crashing the plane. Nevertheless, this is a very important development in the case, and it gives us a better understanding of what happened. Yes, the preliminary report blames the pilots, but that does not mean that they are 100% guilty. The investigation is still on, and we will continue to keep you updated with the latest developments. The second one came at 3,200 feet, and the third one came at 2,200 feet. Yet the pilots did nothing. You can also check out our other videos which we feel you might like. Thank you for watching, and we will catch you in the next one. Have a great day. Plus, even if CRM was an issue, then why only blame the pilots and not the cabin crew? Remember, it takes 2 to tango. If the pilots were having CRM issues, then the cabin crew should have noticed it and prevented it. But that did not happen, so we feel that it is unfair to put the blame solely on the pilots. Secondly, the pilots did not follow the standard operating procedure for a go-around. Yes, the report does blame the pilots for the crash, but that does not mean that Air India is not responsible. Well, we don't agree with this assessment. Why? Because the report nowhere mentions CRM. It only talks about the pilots not following the right procedures. But it never mentions CRM. The airline could still be held responsible for not training its pilots properly or for not having proper safety protocols in place. This is a set of steps that pilots are trained to follow when they realize that a safe landing cannot be done. Thirdly, the pilots did not follow the emergency operating procedures for a rejected landing. According to the report, it says that the pilots were well trained and experienced, and the plane was also airworthy. But why did the crash happen? Well, according to the report, it was the human factor that was responsible for the crash. Miraculously, there were no fatalities. But 157 out of the 182 people on board sustained serious injuries. They needed to land immediately, so it would mean that they wouldn't have time to follow the standard operating procedures for a safe landing. In simple terms, the report says that the pilots messed up at every step which led to the crash. And before moving ahead, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, then make sure to do so at 6:20 a.m. The pilots turned on the autopilot system and selected the altitude and heading modes to follow. As the plane closed in on the runway, the pilots went through the mandatory checklist to ensure that everything was in order for the landing. At 6:24 a.m., the pilots lined the Airbus A320 up with the runway and began the descent. Before we begin, a quick disclaimer. This is an ongoing investigation, and the final report is still pending. The facts are subject to change as more evidence comes to light. We will continue to keep you updated with the latest developments as they become available. August 7th, 2020. Air India Express flight number 1344 was scheduled to fly from Dubai International Airport to Kochi International Airport. At 6:15 a.m., when the plane was approaching the runway, the pilots began the process of getting the aircraft ready for landing. But within seconds, at 6:25 a.m., as the plane was 3,900 feet above the ground, the pilots realized that they were too high and too fast for the approach. What happened next shocked everyone. Instead of going around, the pilots decided to push the throttles to max power and attempt to land the plane. Now, after almost 2 years, the preliminary report has come out, and here's what it says. In simple terms, it means that the pilots made some very bad decisions, which ultimately led to the crash. If you want to know more about what a missed approach and a go-around is, then check out our other videos where we have explained these things in detail. The investigators have also blamed the Air India pilots for ignoring multiple warnings from the plane's computers. The investigators have pointed out that the pilots were focused on maintaining the glide slope, and they ignored the warnings. The investigators have also examined the weather conditions at the time of the crash, and they found that the weather was well within the limits. In view of all of this evidence, the investigators have concluded that the cause of the accident was the decision by the pilots to attempt a landing below the minimums. Now, we need to understand here that the preliminary report does not absolve the airline of any responsibility. So the investigation is still on, and we will have to wait for the final report to come out to get a complete picture of what really happened on that fateful night. Now, once the report came out, many media outlets published that the pilots had made mistakes due to cockpit resource management issues. So we think that it is unfair to blame the crash on CRM. The bottom line is that we still don't know what really happened on that night. That's it for today's video. If you like the content, then do like the video and share it with your friends.